welcome to my channel. My name is Jenna and I'm Empress of Horror. So I've been excited all week to do today's video because today is my first ever Franchise Friday. And as you guys will know if you saw last week's video or if you saw my Instagram stories, the film franchise that I'm going to be talking about for the next few weeks is one of my favourites, Saw. I have said it before and I'll say it again, I love the Saw franchise. I love all the movies, even the bad ones. I just think it's a really great movie franchise. I'm so excited to start talking about it. So let's get into it. Saw was released in 2004 and it was created by James Wan and Leigh Whannell. This film was starring Tobin Bell, Danny Glover, Leigh Whannell, Cary Elwes and Shawnee Smith. And it scored a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. This film follows two men who wake up in a grotty old bathroom chained to the wall by their foot. Neither of them have any recollection of how they got there and they have to follow a series of clues to try and figure out what is going on, how they got there and why they're there in the first place. The thing that impresses me so much about Saw is that this movie was James Wan and Leigh Whannell's first ever movie. They were film students and they had done smaller projects before, but Saw was their first real production and they had such a low budget for it as well. And when it was released, it had a huge hype surrounding it. People couldn't stop talking about this new psychological torture film. And little did they know at the time that this film would go on to become one of the biggest horror franchises in modern horror history. And it has since become a modern horror classic. You can tell, especially in the first film, that they really thought about the storyline and they really did put a lot of care and love and effort into creating this movie. So we're now just going to jump into the spoiler section of this film. So if you haven't seen this movie, have you been living underneath a rock? Go watch it and then come back. I would describe my first time watching the Saw movie as a magical experience. I loved this film so much. I have to say the first Saw movie is very different to the rest of the films. The rest of them are very obviously heavy on the gore and the torture, whereas the first film, it definitely comes across as more of a kind of mystery thriller with gore elements. And this was actually James Wan and Leigh Whannell's intention when creating the Saw movies. They didn't actually intend for it to spiral into the gore, torture porn, horror series that it has since became. Yes, there are gore elements in this film, but they are much more subtle and downplayed than in the other movies. For example, the scene where Lawrence is cutting his foot off at the very end, you first start to see the blade kind of go into his leg, but the more he saws, the camera turns and it's just on his face. You don't actually see the saw going like right through his leg. And had this been a later film that this happened in, you definitely would have seen all of that, all of the excruciating detail. So they do really more just kind of hint and suggest at the gore elements in this movie rather than full on showing you everything. And speaking of the gore, I do really love all of the traps in this movie. It definitely paves the way for the future traps and the future kind of twisted element of Jigsaw and John Kramer. In this movie we're introduced to one of the most, if not the most, iconic trap of the entire Saw franchise, which is the reverse bear trap. We see Amanda wearing it and that's the first time we ever get an experience of it, although it's going to be a long while before we actually see it kill a person. Another one is the razor maze, which sees the victim have to crawl through this maze that's just covered in razors and wires and it looks so painful. As well as another twisted trap which sees a man who's had slow-acting poison injected into his body and he's covered in a flammable substance and he's only got a candle and he's to try and find the code to unlock this safe that's got the antidote in it, but the candle's burning and if it burns out he's going to light himself on fire and eventually he ends up burned to a crisp. These traps were just so terrifying at the time that this film was released and the first time you saw it, because if you'd never seen anything like this before, it was so deranged and outrageous and psychologically disturbing that of course it made Saw such a hit movie and a must-see for horror lovers. Another thing I love about this movie is the detective sort of crime-solving element of this film. I really enjoyed watching Danny Glover and his partner try and track down Jigsaw. I am a fan of true crime and crime movies and kind of detective films, so I did really enjoy seeing this element of it. Going back to what I said earlier about James Wan and Leigh Whannell creating this movie, and you can just tell the amount of care and effort they put into creating this film. They really put a lot of thought into the technical aspects of this movie. Obviously, with such a low budget, they did have restrictions on how technical they could be, so that did mean that they had to use practical effects, which I think all of the practical effects in this film are really, really well done. James Wan also uses very clever filming techniques. You notice anytime you watch this film that our two men in the bathroom, Adam and Lawrence, anytime the camera is on Adam, it's very shaky and uneven and it almost seems handheld. But then when we cut to Lawrence, the camera's always very steady, very controlled, and it seems like it's on a camera stand. This was no accident. James Wan did this intentionally to try and portray to the audience the personalities of each of these characters. Adam being our more erratic, manic character, and Lawrence being our level-headed, rational doctor. I just think this was so clever for James Wan to do this. He's put so much thought and attention to detail in this movie. I also just really love the concept of this movie, the storyline. I love that John Kramer is this man who is dying of some illness, so he decides to go on this rampage, kidnapping and torturing these people to try and teach them the value of life. I just really admire the amount of thought that went into creating this movie. However, I am under no illusions that Saw is a flawless film. It definitely has its issues, which I'll get into now. Mainly the acting. I really have to say the characters Lawrence and Adam, who are played by Cary Elwes and Leigh Whannell, they're not great. Leigh Whannell, I think we can let him off the hook a little bit because he's such a great director and writer, but Cary Elwes, he's got no excuse. I honestly found Cary Elwes laughable in some of the scenes in this movie. I just couldn't really take him seriously, and I felt that as the film went on and the more manic he became and panicked about his family, the more hilarious his acting got. At one point he has a freak out and he just says something it's something like, "Fuck this fucking shit," and it's so funny. I find him very amusing. I'm sorry. I have to say though, Danny Glover was excellent in this film, as well as Michael Emerson, who also played Zepp, and I just really don't like him. I'm gonna blame Lost and who he played in Lost, but he just annoys me. But in a good way, he did a good job of annoying me in this. Another thing I found hilarious in this film was kind of toward the end of the first act, when Lawrence, the doctor, kind of clicks onto like who might have done this, who's put them here, and he's like, "Oh, it's a serial killer. His name is Jigsaw, but I mean technically he's not a serial killer. He hasn't actually killed anyone." And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Of course he's a serial killer. That is bullshit. Of course he's a serial killer. The attempt at suggesting Jigsaw is not a real serial killer is ridiculous. Like, yes, he's kidnapping people and he's trapping them, but he's absolutely killing them. The traps are so hard to win. That guy with the candle had no chance. The guy with the razors had no chance. Don't try and come at me and tell me that Jigsaw isn't a real serial killer, because I'm having none of it. That's not on. There were also a couple of tiny little plot issues I had with this movie. One of them being when the two men are in the room and they find the saws and they try the chains and they're like, "Oh no, it's not going to saw through the chain." But neither of them think to try the padlocks, which have much narrower pieces of metal. Also the pipes. You could probably saw through one of the pipes because pipes tend to be quite thin. Just for them to jump straight to the conclusion of, well, the chain isn't working, so we're just gonna have to go straight through the leg. It was just a jump that I wouldn't make straight away. I would be trying to saw as many things as possible before I have to take my own leg off. And then there's also the biggest plot hole of all in this film for me, which is, what if the two men don't look in their pockets and they don't discover the tapes? What if they never start finding clues and John Kramer's just lying in the middle of the floor like, shit, what do I do now? So yeah, that was kind of my issues with the plot. But I mean, other than that, like, I really, really love these films because I think it's completely iconic, down to the storyline and the traps and the villains, all of it. And Billy the Puppet, how could I not mention Billy the Puppet? I just love it. I think Saw is amazing. So I'm going to give this film a 9 out of 10. I probably am in agreement with everyone else who says the first Saw is the best Saw, because yes, The first Saw is very good, and I think that is down to James Wan and Leigh Whannell and their creative process and all of their fantastic ideas that they brought to this film. However, I do still love all of the rest of the Saw films, and I'm so excited to talk about them in depth with you guys in the coming weeks. And I've managed to time this so well because Spiral is being released on the 21st of May and I'm going to go see it. I'm so excited to go see it. I'm actually just so excited to go to the cinema. But to see a horror film and it be a Saw film as well is just, I cannot wait. So yeah, Spiral is going to be great and I'm going to be doing a review on that at the very end of this series. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my first Franchise Friday video and I'll see you guys very soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye!